How many times have we seen bust-ups between two or more drivers? You know, the sort of thing that happens, the tempers flare, the emotions boil over, and you've got two blokes ready to just engage in a good old-fashioned bout of fisticuffs. Some examples. Now, this isn't every fight in history. I haven't forgotten anybody. This is a sample. You've got Marcus Ambrose and Greg Murphy at Bathurst, Mark Scaife and Russell Ingall at Eastern Creek. It's easier to name who hasn't been in a fight in NASCAR, and then there's the infamous fight between Matt Neal and Jason Plato at Rockingham in 2011. The last one on that list will never not be funny, because Neal was getting ready to smack somebody who still had his helmet on. But sometimes it does boil over for two people who are on the same team. The two most obvious examples of this are Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton between 2014 and 2016, and you've also got Didier Pironi and Gilles Villeneuve in 1982. That all kicked off at the San Marino Grand Prix of that year. But it also happened around 15 years ago, and it is almost 15 years ago now, and that is between Mark Webber and Sebastian Vettel when they were at Red Bull. 2010 was one of those seasons. You had something in the region of 5 or 6 competitive drivers, and a legend was back on the grid. After Jenson Button won the title with Brawn, he was off to McLaren to partner Lewis Hamilton, and Brawn in itself had been purchased by Mercedes, and Mercedes was fielding a pair of drivers that shared the same nationality as well, because McLaren's drivers were both British and Mercedes drivers were both German. The Michael was back, and this was a big thing for the sport. It kind of helped the viewership, and it also eased a little bit of the uncertainty that was in the sport at that time, because Honda, Toyota and BMW were now all gone, having all withdrawn thanks to the global economic downturn. BMW had cited a lack of future viability and sustainability. Given how unsuccessful BMW had been in their time with the Sauber team, it was probably just a cover for, we've spent a lot of money for just one win in 2008, so we're off. Still, we weren't as bad as Toyota, were we? The other manufacturer that had disappeared, although with an asterisk next to it, was Renault. The French car maker had sold 75% of the team to Genie Capital. The team would keep the Renault name and the engine department for the team would still be under Renault's ownership, but Renault had pulled out, also citing the economic downturn. But they had structured the deal in such a way that they could buy the team back once things had settled down a bit, which they did at the end of 2015. But the team was still Renault. It was still painted in yellow and black. Now, as a fun fact, Jenson and Lewis being together was the first time two world champions, the last two world champions, had been together at the same team since McLaren had done the same thing with Prost and Senna in 1989. And the best part about the 2010 season is that there was no dominant runaway winner or two-horse race emerging in the opening parts of the season. In testing, Ferrari, McLaren and Red Bull had each been fastest in at least one of the 4 pre-season tests, those being held at Jerez, Barcelona, Valencia and Bahrain. And in the opening 3 races, there had been 3 different winners. Alonso won the season opener at Bahrain, joining an elite club. That club consisting of Fangio, Luigi Musso, Giancarlo Baghetti, Mario Andretti, Nigel Mansell and Kimi Raikkonen. They were all debut winners with the team. And then Button won in Australia, with Vettel winning in Malaysia. Webber would be the first back-to-back winner of the season, winning in Spain and Monaco, and was on course to win in Turkey if not for an incident on lap 40 of that race, where Vettel attempted to pass him. Both cars were wiped off the track. Vettel retired and Webber limped home in third behind Hamilton and Button, an incident that allowed McLaren to temporarily take the lead of the Constructors' Championship. The incident started a little bit of tension within the Red Bull garage because Christian Horner had heavily implied that Webber had caused the accident by squeezing Vettel, sort of completely exonerating Vettel from any wrongdoing, if you want to call it that. He was also quite visibly annoyed that the two of them had thrown away the 1-2 that they were on course to get. So 3 races later, the calendar had advanced to the British Grand Prix, the first on the newer layout that is still in use today. Well, I say that. It wasn't completely changed yet because the new pits hadn't been fully finished, so the race still started on the old pit straight between Woodcote and Copse, with the rest of the layout being what it is now. Basically, they used the British GT setup for this round. It was also a race that wasn't originally going to be at Silverstone. 2009 was going to be the last one before moving to a redeveloped Donington Park, but all of that fell through, and Silverstone signed a new 17-year deal to keep the Grand Prix instead in 2009. Part of the agreement was the redevelopment of the pits and paddock to create what we see today. I've done a video on all this before, if you're interested. The drivers, for the most part, quite enjoyed the new layout, saying that the new entry to Abbey was a lot of fun and there was a bump on the way in that had the potential to upset the car. Despite this, the drivers were saying it was better than the entry to Copse that was at the beginning of the lap, and the new layout was shuffling the times around a bit, because Alonso and Massa were struggling to find pace, and Vitaly Petrov was faster than Kubica. McLaren had also brought their own version of the blown diffuser, but quickly abandoned it for the time being, because they found that it wasn't giving them much of an improvement. Ferrari and Mercedes had brought their versions at the previous race, as they all sought to copy what Red Bull had come up with, and somehow shoehorn this thing into something that already existed, while Red Bull had designed the whole thing with these blown diffusers in mind. You know what I'm talking about. The ones that sound like this. Red Bull stamped their authority at the top of the timesheets by putting in absolutely rapid lap times, but during that same practice session, Vettel had gone through Abbey and experienced a full front wing failure. He managed to limp the car back round to the pits and, well, everything was fine. Nobody crashed, no cars were written off, all good. And here begins the bust-up, because Red Bull had brought a new aero package for this Grand Prix, and had manufactured 2 front wings to be a part of this aero upgrade, which were the only 2 that they were able to make in time for the race. So Vettel got one, and Webber got one. They both had the new spec. But following Vettel's front wing failure at Abbey, the team was in a bit of a predicament. So you'd think then what they would do is they would take one of the spares allocated to Vettel's car and pop it on so he could go out and do qualifying. It would be the old spec front wing, but it should still be good enough and competitive enough. But they didn't do that. Red Bull instead went to Webber's car, took his new spec front wing off, and put it on Vettel's car instead, forcing Webber to have 2 of the old ones. Red Bull's reasoning was that this was done because Vettel was above Webber in the standings and should therefore get the new front wing. Vettel had also won the previous race in Valencia, the race where Webber had started in second but then been eliminated on lap 9 in that famous loop-the-loop incident where he vaulted over the back of Kovalainen's Lotus. But Webber was not happy. He was even more unhappy when Vettel went on to take pole position with that same new front wing that he felt should have been on his car, and only by a small margin too. It was just over 1/10 of a second. It served little more than to reignite the discussion that Red Bull was clearly favouring Vettel, especially since Webber had been blamed for the collision in Turkey, and this was some way of letting Vettel get a bit of a leg up and a bit of compensation for what happened. Webber in the press conference gave a cryptic "the team got what they wanted today," implying that Seb got his pole and that's all that apparently mattered to Red Bull, and slammed his glass down on the table. Elsewhere in qualifying, Jensen was down in 14th after he struggled with the McLaren on the new layout. The MP425 looking quite rough over the bumps going into the new section, and that lost him a bit of time. He had got into the second qualifying session, his time being 6/10 slower than Vettel's, but in the second session he was 1.5 down on Webber's fastest time. But the Red Bulls were fast. They were the only 2 drivers to go sub 1:30 all weekend. So as the grid lined up on the Sunday, Alonso and Hamilton were in a prime spot to be able to capitalise on the 2 Red Bulls coming a cropper. And despite being on the dirty side of the track, Webber and Hamilton made the best starts of the 2 on that dirty side. I mean, to be fair though, it is Silverstone. With the amount of extra racing that goes on there, the dirt would have been sufficiently cleared on that old start-finish straight, so the dirty side wasn't as much of a disadvantage as it might have been elsewhere. Webber was in a drag race with Vettel and Seb squeezed him towards the wall before moving out to the left to open up Copse corner so he could take a higher speed through it. Hamilton tried to have a sniff up the inside and backed out, with Seb just ever so slightly turning across the front of the McLaren and getting the lightest of grazes on his right rear from Hamilton's front wing, and this gave him a puncture. Webber must have been thinking happy thoughts in his cockpit, one of them probably being, "Come on!" Vettel wasn't the only one in trouble because Alonso and Massa had hit each other too, and Massa got a puncture for his trouble. Although watching the footage, I don't know what Massa was trying to achieve. He'd lobbed it up the inside of Maggots and Beckett's, and that's where the contact had initially happened, and then coming through Chapel onto the hangar straight, he almost squeezed Alonso onto the grass. Alonso had lost out to Kubica and Rosberg at the start and was trying to make his way back up to maximise his points haul, knowing that Vettel was losing out. As he tried to overtake the pole around the outside of the newly profiled club corner, Alonso cut the right-hand portion of it, gaining a position. The stewards started investigating, but controversy ensued when they decided they were going to hand Alonso a drive-through, but they decided on the penalty after Kubica had retired with a drive shaft failure. so quite a harsh penalty all things considered, but handing the position back would have solved all of that. Hindsight. Alonso's British Grand Prix was made even worse when Pedro de la Rosa in the Sauber had been tapped by Sutil's Force India. Everything seemed fine until they came onto the hangar straight and the Sauber's rear wing end plates disintegrated. The safety car had to come out, meaning the field would be bunched up when Alonso took his penalty, losing him a lot more places than he would have liked, as he couldn't take the penalty during the safety car period. Vettel, meanwhile, who was on the edge of being lapped by Webber, was now able to rejoin the back of the train and began picking cars off one by one once the race resumed. He had to bully his way past Sutil, making contact with the Force India twice through turns 3 and 4 as he tried to force the issue. Sutil was not impressed by this, as he came under attack from Schumacher's Mercedes, and Sutil had actually managed to dive bomb his way past Schumacher at Brooklands earlier in the race. By contrast, Webber was having a much easier time. The only thing he was worried about was how far back Hamilton was, or how close Hamilton was, and although Hamilton was only about 1.5 seconds further back, Webber was able to maintain the lead and he crossed the line in first place. Webber won by 1.3 seconds as the checkered flag was shown for the final time at Woodcote, at least in Formula 1. Hamilton was second and Rosberg in the Mercedes was third, just beating Button, who had clawed his way up from 14th to be within half a second or so of getting on the podium. It was one of those, if I had 3 more laps types of races. The remainder of the top 10 was Barrichello's Williams, Kobayashi's Sauber, and then the Germans: Vettel, Sutil, Schumacher, and Hülkenberg. Webber emerged onto the podium absolutely ecstatic over winning given what had happened the previous morning. In the press conference he was asked if it was poetic justice, to which he replied, "Well, maybe there is a bloke upstairs every now and then. I made a good start and I was very keen to make it my corner, put it that way." Webber also made every highlight reel for eternity in this race. When he crossed the line he was congratulated by Christian Horner, and he just responded with, "Yep, fantastic guys, not bad for a number 2 driver. Cheers." Given the mixed up nature of the 2010 season, the standings after the British Grand Prix put Hamilton top on 145 points. Button was in second with 133. Webber was now up to third on 128, Vettel down a spot to fourth on 121, and Alonso on 98. In the Constructors, McLaren had 278, Red Bull 249, Ferrari 165, and then Mercedes on 126, Renault on 89. But there's one more fun fact here, and it just goes to show how competitive the season was. There is a very unique statistic in all of this. Because all the drivers mixed about so much and they kept swapping places so often, when a driver won a race, they were never top of the standings when they won a race. So when Hamilton won, he wasn't top. When Webber won, he wasn't top. When Button won, he wasn't top. The guy who was top of the standings never won a race while top. That's mental. And one more fun fact that I forgot to mention, yes, I genuinely forgot this time, Vettel was not top of the standings at any point through the 2010 season, until he won the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. So then, a look at the time mark. Webber wasn't bad for a number 2 driver. If this has brought back the memories or I've taught you some cool little tidbits, then like the video so I know I've done a good job. And for more like this, get subscribed with the bell on so you never miss out on anything else I do around here. Big thanks to the fine bunch of lads over at Patreon, and if you want to contribute to the picture purchasing piggy bank, then there is a link to Patreon in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, and referral links. Well, there's super thanks and memberships under the video if you want to do stuff that way. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.